Neil Young, episode 4. We're back together again, and we're going to try this one more time and get better and get less time of your lives as you listen to us yammer on about our feelings about Neil Young.
Lean
Lou,
and
how are you
mean.
this morning?
Lean and mean. Um, I'm good.
Made,
It's snowing here. Um, I've reached my limit with winter, I think.
yeah, it
But
seems to happen every year. Every year it's like we don't
yeah,
understand that winter's coming back, and it's the same as it always is.
yeah. I mean, we changed we set the clocks ahead in 2 weeks, so there's light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. So I'm feeling pretty positive about that. But this is a Mount Rushmore for me,
Yeah,
definitely.
Neil is. I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday, and he said, "Well, it can't be as bad as Bob Dylan in content wise." And I went, "You know what? I think it's worse. I think it's I think it's worse. He Neil's got as many releases as Bob, and with Neil, the songs, it's not like one and done. He'll record a song, it'll be on 6 different albums, six
Hmm.
different ways,
Yeah, acoustic, electric. Yeah.
and the man's got, I counted just on Apple Music, 22 live albums. And not BS live albums like Pearl Jam does, where or the Who or other Hot Tuna does it now too, where every set is being released as a live album. Everything they perform. Not like that, like actual thought out live albums. And some of his quote unquote studio albums are live albums. Like Rust Never Sleeps is a live album, but it's all new material. It's just amazing the content. And now all the archives he's putting out under his own label. He got all his archives back from the different labels. And a record came out yesterday of another live album from 1990.
So do you think Neil's going to do what everybody else seems to be doing now and just and sell it off?
I don't know. That's a good question. I never even really thought about that in preparing. That's a good question because on one hand, it totally would make sense,
Hmm.
and there's a lot of value there. On the other hand, I can't think of, and I might be wrong in this, I can't think of a single Neil Young song that he has complete control over that's been in a commercial.
No, that's one of the things that I noted was my whole life I don't remember him ever selling his music for that use.
I don't think so. There might be songs he's been on from Buffalo Springfield or Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young that have been. I don't even know if that's the case because a lot of the more commercial CSN and Y songs, there's no Y on them, even if it's an album he was on. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if he would. I think it would be strictly enforced. You can't mess around. Like he's doing it just so he's just selling off the income from publishing that comes from the creative, the use of it as listening to music
Right.
from traditional outlets, not from. And I
But
don't know
can
this for
you
sure
but
either,
could
but I'm
you
sure he's had songs placed in television and movie, but that's different.
that's different.
That's not,
And yeah, and but could you I mean on a high level if without getting into the weeds of these things, um once you sell something, you can't really control what the buyer does with it. Like if you sell your house, you can't go back and say, "Well, you got to keep it white." You know.
no, but you can with property like this, with intellectual property, you could sell a portion, you can sell a minority portion. It could be built into the agreement that says for this amount of years you can't do
So you could
X,
have
Y,
a
or
you could do
Z.
a term limit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
and then
I
it
don't know that
reverts
you could.
back.
I don't know that anybody would do that,
Mm,
but you could certainly build in a situation where here's what you can't do with what you're buying from me, because it's different than selling a house or a
right.
car. You sell that, it's gone, it's a thing. This is art is a little different. I mean, in the art world, paintings and such, you can't buy a piece of art and then print up T-shirts and sell the T-shirts.
Right.
It's the intellectual property of it is still owned. The copyright part of that is still owned by the artist. Uh, I mean, you probably could do it with, a Picasso or something because it's not protected the same way. But contemporary art, you can't start selling prints of a painting you bought.
Mm-hmm.
So I would assume it would be the same. But going back to your question, would Neil sell? He definitely is releasing these archives, A, because he wants some intellectual control over his legacy. B, it might be to some degree what Bob Dylan
With the copyright.
does with the copyright issues to
Yeah.
make sure things don't go into the public domain if they're unreleased. So it's partially that as well. But I gotta say, to have a living artist work with their archives this way is way better than having his children and ex-wives do it,
Mm-hmm.
which is what happens to most musicians. Most musicians don't want to address their own legacy, whether out of artistic passion to move forward and create new, or embarrassment of not wanting to go back and look at that stuff. Neil's done a great job. Some of those reissues are amazing, and it's not all live stuff. There are albums that he recorded and just put on the shelf and never put out. A record called Homegrown he put out a couple years ago or last year or whatever it came out is a record that was supposed to come out in the mid 70s for the most part. And it got shelved. A few songs appeared here and there and other things, but otherwise it got shelved because he was just, he was too miserable about the record because about his first marriage breaking up. So he's done a great job. He and whoever's working with him have done a very, very interesting job if you're a fan. The other reason I don't find Neil as daunting as Dylan, or Neil just as daunting as Bob Dylan is, like Bob, and actually more so than Bob. He's very much Neil Young always. There's been a couple weirdo things we'll talk about later in the
Yeah.
80s, but other than that, the very, very first Neil Young solo album compared to the most recent full album, it's not like crazy different.
I
You
was
could
gonna
take
I
that
was gonna say
new
that
album
too.
and play
Yeah.
it for people in 1969, and they'd be like, "Hey, Neil Young's new album."
Right. Yeah. I was gonna say the same thing. I mean, just in terms of the sound as well as the look. I mean, I mean, a little, obviously in the late '60s, but '70s to '90s, he really didn't. And even today, he really looks the same. He all around looks and sounds the same.
Yeah, and Neil, like, flashing back to our last episode about Bob Dylan, Neil, like many artists of the late 60s into the 70s, especially solo artists, benefited from Bob Dylan's brash mixing of folk and rock, which nobody had done before. And so gave artists like Neil Young, the ability to go back and forth, and nobody even questioned it.
Hmm.
Nobody got angry. What's he doing? He's playing too loud, or what's he doing? That's boring acoustic stuff. He could do either. He go back and forth, and nobody even blinked at it because 5, 6, 8 years earlier, Bob Dylan broke that barrier for artists, and to a huge degree, that's kind of what the late 60s and early 70s became all about in rock music, is that ability to take all kinds of genres and mash them together.
Right.
So let's go into our first section that we repeat here. You talk in anything you're passionate about, you get in mixed company, you start talking about it, and there's always that guy, the naysayer, who will throw in, and I can be that person sometimes, and I'm sure as you can too, that will
Hmm.
throw in and say, yeah, but what about? Um, so the naysayers lament. What are the things that people would say about Neil Young that would try to knock him off his pedestal?
Well, I mean, I think the most obvious would be the voice. You know, um, similar to Dylan. That's something that the the naysayers would kind of get on him about, or um, I think that's probably the most obvious. Um,
Yeah, it is not what somebody who's wants to hear, you know, Tony Bennett or something. It's not that kind of. He's not a crooner, but as we said about Bob Dylan, he can carry a tune.
mhm.
It's in his own unique voice, but he is a masterful vocalist of all types of music. But again, you hear that a little bit about Neil, but you don't hear it as much, I think, because of Bob Dylan. Because he broke that barrier as well to say, it doesn't matter. You don't
Right.
have to sound like Bobby Darin, to make popular music. I had in here a couple things. Those albums that we just kind of referenced about, he made these two really odd records in the 80s, which were partially artistic, artistic, rebellion, and partially let's see if we can make the guy that owns my record label really upset. So he made an album
Might
called
that be?
Trans. Yeah, he made an album called Trans, which is like an electronic album before there was such a thing. He used this vocalizer on his voice and to sound like a robot, and it's the strange. It's like a traditional rock and Neil Young Crazy Horse record with the robot singing. If Max Headroom was in a rock band. And then
So
he
who
made like
did
a
he?
hillbilly rockabilly record called Everybody's Rockin', where it's like everybody's rocking on Quaaludes. It's the strangest record. Uh, but the thing is, people don't know those records exist. You don't remember unless you're like us or our age and you were watching MTV like lunatics in the mid '80s, and they would play those. There was two videos. One was a live video from Trans, and one was that Everybody's Rockin', where he's in like a pink Cadillac. You remember that? Remember that video?
I just remember. I think you sent me a a, a GIF or something, but I remember that when he was wearing the mic headset,
Yeah, and the
like
sunglasses.
looking like he was I mean, we know we know he had some. He would hang with Devo, and I have a bit more on that, but
Right,
that was like
they did
him
a
doing his.
collaboration.
Yeah, it was like him doing his kind of Devo modern kind of
Yeah,
thing.
he's like, I can be that guy. Yeah, it was very, very strange.
It was
Uh,
yeah.
the other two things I mentioned quick, and I don't know if we'll talk about this later as well. Neil's been very vocal about being anti-digital, yet I don't know that anybody has benefited more from the new business model in the music business of the digital platform where you can get more music out more quickly. He's put out an astonishing amount of records in the past 10 years. I wrote it down here somewhere. 11 albums in the last 10 years. And you wouldn't be able to do that in 1995. It would have been impossible. so so in that battle he's had with not only digital music as in downloads or streaming, but also with the CD, which he seems to hate as well.
Mhm.
He started this company called Pono, Pono. He was trying to create his own iPod, and
It
he did.
looked like a Toblerone.
Yeah, it looked like a Toblerone, and it was apparently this amazing, higher fidelity and wonderful, better than the iPod. He wasn't compressing the music, blah 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 blah, but it crashed, miserably.
Well, his main contention was that the whoever came up with the
Right.
convert analog to digital made a mistake.
Yeah, that's seems like a conspiracy theory to me, but maybe it's true. I don't know. So So that was a big deal for him for quite a while. I remember him going on the talk shows. I remember there was this trailer,
It was
a
like a
commercial,
documentary or something
yeah, or something.
that
I
he
just he was on in his ranch, and he'd have people come over, and he'd plug that Pono thing into one of his old cars, and have people sit and listen. Of course, he's sitting right there, and Beck and Eddie Vedder and Jack White, whoever else was
and
there,
Tom Petty, yeah.
Tom Petty. What are they gonna say? Oh, Neil, this is terrible. It sounds like an iPod to me, Neil. I mean, well, Neil, I've been performing on stage in front of gigantic amplifiers for the past 30 years, so I really can't hear anything anyway. I don't know what they're
I
gonna
just
say.
I just think it failed because you couldn't fit that thing in your pocket, you know.
That's part of it. It also failed. Go and try to open up a new Walmart and see what happens. You know what I mean? You can't. At a certain point, you can't fight City Hall. Also, here's another thing. I've been in the record business for 30 plus years at all levels, selling records, working in retail, distribution, management, label, blah, blah, blah. Here's one thing I'm positive of: the average consumer, which makes up 99% of the business, does not care about fidelity. They
Nope.
do not care. The
He's a
Beatles became the biggest musicians in the history of music by people listening to it on their crappy black and white TV with a 2-inch speaker and girls screaming so you couldn't hear the music.
right.
So people don't care about fidelity. They think they do, but most of us don't have the ability to even hear it, know the difference.
Usability, ease of use,
Ease of use,
access.
right? It's it's. Now I'm not saying now you should. Well, we don't care then. Let's just make crappy music. No, you should obviously want your art to be as good as it possibly can be. But to shame people, which is how I feel about guys like Neil Young sometimes, in the way they talk about fidelity, they're kind of shaming the consumer. You're not listening to this right. You're not doing this right. You need to listen to my music this way. It just seems counterproductive. I can appreciate the Mona Lisa by looking at the way close to 100% of the people on Earth will ever see the Mona Lisa, which is through my
Not in
computer.
person. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So obviously it's better to see it in person, but most people don't get that opportunity. It's the same with fidelity and music. Yes, you should make it the greatest available, make it available to people, but you can't shame people. And you got to let people listen to your music the way they can find it. And at the end of the day, for a rock musician, the best way to see their music should be live, which for Neil Young is probably the case.
He's a bucket list artist for me. I've never seen him
Yeah,
live,
me either. I can't believe
and I can't
I was.
believe it. Yeah,
Yeah, me too. I can't
it
believe I've never
bothers
seen
me.
Neil Young. It's weird that it just never crossed the right way. I'm not one of those concert goers, and probably it's because of being in the business that will go too far out of my way to see a show, just because, just because it's, kind of know how it goes. So a lot of the things I'm passionate about, they better be down the street, or I'd rather just see it at home, kind of thing. But yeah, it's weird that I've never
And
been to a Neil
now,
Young show.
yeah, and I mean, aside from him getting older, now and the last several years are really when I wanted to see him because I want to see him in a smaller venue, acoustic. I love
Right.
plugged in, but for me personally, it's him with the one acoustic guitar is how I want to see him.
All right, so let's move on. And the only other small thing I had about Naysayers Lament, which we kind of touched on, is isn't that guy an a-hole? Yeah, that's it. That's the point, guys. Yeah, he's a jerk. Neil Young's a jerk, and he doesn't like you, and screw you. And that is part of his appeal, as far as I'm concerned. And that'll come up a few times as we chat, I'm sure. All right, let's move on. Phases of Neil Young. There are almost too many, so in order to get rolling, we probably should roll through these pretty quick. But the first phase I had was Neil Young the Folky, which, as we said, because of Bob Dylan, he certainly was heavily influenced by Bob Dylan, as was so many young people in the mid '60s. Up in Canada, where Neil finally, Neil and his family, and his mother mostly, actually finally settled in Winnipeg, there was a huge scene going on there, which is weird because Winnipeg is the middle of nowhere. It's it's kind of like Denver, but smaller, I guess. It's a plains town. The winters are brutal, but you had other artists from that area. Joni Mitchell's from there.
Mhm.
Randy Bachman from the Guess Who and Bachman Turner Overdrive is from there. Artists would pass through there a lot and play shows. That's where he first met Stephen Stills. He actually wrote a song for the Guess Who, which was a hit that Randy picked up from him and made it a hit song.
Neil's never renounced his Canadian citizenship either.
No, I think he's not a U.S. citizen, right? But he's very much a U.S. He's lived here
Yeah,
forever.
he's been
He's
here
lived
for
here
a long
since
time.
he was illegal when he first moved here. Neil had polio
Hmm.
when he was one of the last waves of people to get polio before everybody got vaccinated.
Joni
So did
Mitchell
Joni
did
Mitchell
too.
had
Yeah,
polio too. Yeah, he had a very slight case of it, but still he had polio.
that's
Um,
when I think that's when he started his whole infatuation with cars.
and trains probably too, right?
Yeah, because they went down to Florida
Yeah,
to
he
make
lived
a
in Florida
deal.
for a little while, right? Right. And this time too, around this time is when he joined a group which was fronted by Rick James, the super freak of all people. And
Ricky
they got
James.
signed to Motown. The group, the Mina Birds, got signed to Motown, and they never made a record or put a record out because Rick James got arrested because he was AWOL from the Navy Reserve. Because he didn't want to go to Vietnam. so so that could have been a much different world if that the Mina Birds got their deal and put a record out with Motown.
I
Would we
just
have Neil Young?
I can't even imagine. Yeah.
That group also had Bruce Palmer, who would later be the bass player in Buffalo Springfield. So there's that connection, as well as him knowing Neil had met Stephen Stills a couple times. So the next phase is he moves to L.A. Like many people in that time, they saw what was happening on the Sunset Strip in Laurel Canyon, and they're like, that's where I should be. It wasn't New York anymore, it was LA. It wasn't San Francisco yet, it was LA.
This was 1966, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
So he goes down there totally illegally. He's in the country illegally. He's an illegal alien. He runs into Stephen Stills, literally runs into Stephen Stills on Sunset Boulevard.
He was driving
And
like wasn't he driving like an old hearse or
he had
something?
yes, and it was just like a piece of junk, yeah. Back in those days when they didn't check your car, you could drive anything you wanted on the roads.
Yeah.
So he runs into Stephen Stills. Stephen asks him to join Buffalo Springfield, a little group they're putting together. And that's kind of starts it. That kind of starts up what Neil Young becomes right there, is that encounter in that group. Uh, the Byrds, even though they only made a couple records, they're in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, partly maybe for political reasons, but also partly because they kind of created what became folk rock. Yeah, the Byrds were around and there were other groups around, but Buffalo Springfield really, they weren't folk, they were rock, but they were folky in that their songs were about something. They weren't about surfing or chasing girls. So that's Neil in a nutshell from that point forward, as far as
I
I'm
think what's
concerned.
really cool about, I mean, I'm infatuated with that whole Laurel Canyon
Right.
history anyway. Um, and it's great when you drive up over the hills and, the store is still there. A lot of it's still there. Joni's house is still there.
Yeah,
And
Zappa's house. Lady Gaga owns Zappa's house now.
yeah, and Neil was actually, I didn't know this until recently. Neil was a neighbor of John Dennison's.
That makes sense. I always talk about that. I don't want to go off on the Doors because I'm a rare Doors fan, it seems like. But the whole Laurel Canyon thing, the whole LA thing, the Doors really never get mentioned. I don't know why they get slighted. But they were right in the mix of it too and lived
Hmm.
up there. Yeah, I always do the same thing. Whenever
Yeah,
I'm in
Jim's
LA,
Jim's house was right behind the store.
yeah. Whenever I'm in LA, I drive through that area always slowly as possible. I'm
Yeah,
fascinated by it. That would be where I'd want to live if I lived in LA.
yeah,
And it's
just
still a hot spot. It's still a place artists and musicians they seek out because you feel like you're in the country, but you're
mhm,
literally right above the Sunset Strip. If it
right.
wasn't for the hills, you could probably walk. Hollywood Bowl's right there. The Hollywood sign's right there. Everything's right, right there. It is the most classic LA neighborhood. And it's the kind of thing on the East Coast it's hard for us to appreciate because our cities aren't like that, especially New York, Boston, DC. Our cities don't have those little country areas that are really just part of the city, just a residential area.
So one of the other things I thought was really interesting during the Springfield period was the probably the start also of what would become many clashes with Stephen.
That's
Um,
amazing to me
yeah,
how those four, especially the three of them. Graham Nash a little less so because he's English and I think he doesn't really care as much. He's a little
yeah,
more of a hippie than the other guys, maybe. I
yeah.
don't know. But they constantly, from that point forward, you're right.
There's three alphas.
Yeah. I mean, part of the reason Buffalo Springfield broke up is because, the fighting over who's in charge. I mean, there's
Right.
multiple singers, multiple songwriters in a group like that, which was always difficult. Yeah, he fights with Steven Stills. See it. He joins Crosby, Stills, Nash. Fights with them. Battles it out at Woodstock. They come together again. They've made Steven Stills and Neil Young, and I know I sent this to you, and I can't stop listening to it. Made one of the worst albums in the history of the '70s. It is the most cocaine-fueled, easy listening record I've ever heard in my life. There are songs on that record that are the worst thing ever, and that's another part of this. Just these all this music, that Neil is a
Yeah.
part of. But yeah, that starts that. That starts that whole always those guys always fighting.
There's a video, and we'll have to share this on our one of our YouTube playlist. Um, but there's a video of them on this really awful TV show, lip syncing for what it's worth, and Mr. Soul, and it's I kind of was watching it recently, and you can kind of tell like Steven almost is like upstaging Neil as Neil's performing Mr. Soul. It's like, you know, and I think Neil was definitely like anti, I don't want to go on the Tonight Show and lip
Yeah,
sync.
he was always that guy. He was
Yeah.
always that. That goes back to isn't he an a-hole? He was always that guy. The story from Woodstock. He he threatened the cameraman at Woodstock when they were doing their electric set. That's why none of their electric sets in the movie. He threatened the cameraman and said, "I'm not being in your movie, and if you point that camera at me, I'm going to take my guitar off and chop you down with it." So, which why? Like, what's I don't understand that problem. It wasn't about money. Like, there's famous stories about Woodstock, like the group Mountain, which could have been one of the biggest groups of all time, kind of America's cream. They're not in the Woodstock movie or on the album because their manager said, "Nope, we're not doing that. It's not enough money." So they're the dumbest decisions in the history of rock and roll. But yeah, he's just a curmudgeon from when he was 20. To this day, I think right now, this second, Neil and David Crosby are not talking to each other because David Crosby said something crappy about Daryl Hannah, who Neil is now married to.
Would not shock me.
And he said it like on the Howard Stern show or something. He said something terrible. And just because David Crosby's a jerk, can't keep his mouth shut.
He doesn't have a filter.
Yeah. So these are 70-plus-year-old men, and they're still arguing about girls.
Yeah,
I mean,
they would
it's
still.
ridiculous.
I could still see them getting in a fist fight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just yank that mustache right off his face.
Yep.
So After Springfield, they made a couple records, huge, impactful records. Obviously, started a whole thing. I mean, there's no Eagles. There's no what the Byrds became with Graham Parsons. There's no whole country rock phenomena that the Rolling Stones even furthered without Buffalo Springfield. So he goes solo, makes his first solo record, makes another record, puts Crazy Horse together. Then let's skip right to 4 phase. Then, as we were talking about, he joins Crosby, Stills, and Nash, becomes Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. He's not Crosby, Stills, and Nash as a trio make far more records, tour way more than they ever did with Neil on board. But really, the albums and the songs Neil are involved in are the songs people think about when they think about CSN, right?
Yeah.
He famously writes Ohio. They see the Kent State thing on TV. He goes off in the woods, comes back like 20 minutes later with Ohio. They record it and they put it out as a single in like a month, 2 months, which was remarkable for that time. They've obviously done multiple reunions, albums, tours. They play on each other's records, all the way through the 70s. The guys will show up on Neil records. Neil will show up on their records. They obviously are they're like brothers. But at the same time, yeah,
it can only
just
last so
battling
long.
it out, like hate each other's guts at the same time.
Yep, just like the Kinks, just like Oasis.
Yeah.
Yeah, just.
And then after really what we think of as CSN&Y, which is those 2 years or so at the end of the 60s, early 70s, Neil kind of then transforms into what we think of as Neil Young, which I call a country and western rock and roll rebel. So he's not doing alt country, he's not doing folk rock. To me, when you listen to these records and you listen to Neil, because he grew up in the plains, the North American West, which Winnipeg is a city of that, just like Cheyenne or Denver. That cowboy western vibe just leaks out of him, right?
Yeah.
So Harvest, Zuma, all those records just have that vibe to them that if today, maybe he was a new artist today, he'd be Jason Isbell. He'd be, or if he was very commercial, he'd be a Luke Bryan or a Jason Aldean or something, I guess, right?
Crossover, yeah.
I don't think people think of him that way necessarily. Maybe they think of him as folk rock, but they certainly don't put Neil in the alt country phase. But he's, my last phase calls him the godfather of grunge and an elder statesman of rock, which he is, but he's also the godfather of alt country.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I mean, remember,
how can you not say that?
And we can talk more about this, but I mean, 1985 is just burned in my memory with Farm Aid.
Right, he creates Farm Aid with Willie Nelson and John Mellencamp.
Yeah, I mean, that was huge. I mean, and that was the era when benefit concerts really kind of had a resurgence. And that first Farm Aid was just massive.
Yeah. And if you're Chris Stapleton, I wrote these people down. Chris Stapleton, Florida Georgia Line, Eric Church, Dierks Bentley, Blake Shelton. If you're any of these people, you better realize you're paying homage to Neil Young. That you don't make this kind of music without what Neil Young has laid down. Now, I don't know that Neil wants to claim any of these people, maybe Chris Stapleton, but otherwise, a lot of these guys are, right-wing, flag-waving idiots. But they don't really understand the music they're making is a rebellious music. It's not a, red Solo cup drinking music, even though that's what it's become. And, even at his elder age, Neil would kick all these guys' asses as a guitar player and as a songwriter and as a performer. But it seems like instead of instead of praying at the altar of Neil Young, these guys pray at the altar of Hank Williams Jr., which Hank Williams Jr. is a poser. He's just a phony. He's just a drunk idiot and who tried to capitalize off and commercialize things Neil Young was doing, as far as I'm concerned. And speaking of that too, the other thing I thought about this week, and it kind of made me sad, is I hope Neil Young never gets canceled, because he uses a lot of Native American imagery, a lot of Native American names, songs like Pocahontas, and I could see
people
taking that stuff out of context.
Yeah.
Going, what is this white man singing about this stuff for? Because he's not American Indian at all, I don't believe. But he comes to it naturally because he comes from that place. Having a backing band called Crazy Horse, I could see where you wouldn't do that today. Mm-hmm. I get that. You wouldn't start a band and call it Crazy Horse if you're just 5 white guys. But I just hope that doesn't happen to him. I don't think it will. I think he's, outspoken enough, and I think if it did, I think he'd just stomp it.
You think? Yeah, I think with him, the intent is all. Cortez the Killer. Just he's trying to point out the deficits in history.
I get that, but people don't listen and they don't think about context. The fact that they're digging up David Letterman interviews from 20 years ago and trying to shame him, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's not like this stuff was secret. It was on TV. It's easily accessible. So it's the same thing with Neil. It made me a little bit, sad. But just one last thing before we go into our songs here. Back to the Godfather of Grunge. You listen to Zuma. To me, that's the album, and that's the album a lot of people point to as well. That really sets up what Pearl Jam was doing, what Soundgarden was doing, what the Nirvana was doing. Just the way he soloed, the way it was about the art and not about. He wasn't trying to be Steely Dan. He's not trying to make the perfect record with the perfect guitar solo.
King of the one-note solo.
Yeah. And listen, Kurt Cobain quoted a Neil Young song in a suicide note. That has to make you feel weird if you're Neil Young.
Yeah, he's commented on that.
He has a lot. He did an album with Pearl Jam as the backing group. It's okay.
Yeah, speaking of that, so you being a label guy. So you have Pearl Jam signed to label A, you have Neil signed to label B, and that album gets put out.
What label was the album on? Mirrorball. Was it on? I'll look right now.
Was it Warner? Or was he still with?
Well, Neil's on Reprise. Was on Reprise all those years, and at that time he was. It was right after kind of a comeback.
Was Reprise like a sub of Warner?
No, it's Warner. Yeah, but the Pearl Jam are Columbia.
Yeah. So how did they work that out?
I'm gonna look it up now because I don't remember what label that was on.
Was it like did Pearl Jam's label just say, all right, we're not gonna really promote the fact that you're the backing band?
It's Reprise Epic. So somehow they just bridged it.
Okay. So they kind of partnered up, or
they just must have worked out the money in the back. But at that time, 1995, you're not gonna tell Pearl Jam no if you're Epic.
No, yeah, they had some leverage at that point.
Pearl Jam comes to you and goes, listen, we're going to make this record. We don't care what you say. We're going to do it. What are you going to do? You can't say no. So they worked it. They obviously worked it out. It's one of those things. I'm sure. I don't think a ton of money was spent on it. They probably did. I think they did a tour. And they had played together quite a bit already. So, something like that you let happen. It's just history. All right, that's the phases of Neil Young. You got anything to plug in here before we move along?
Just one last comment. Neil's often credited as giving all the grunge guys the drop D tuning, that they utilize so much. And that's true. but Neil's, just as with the folk tradition, Neil's getting all that from all the people that came before him, and being from Canada, and there's the Celtic influence where alternate tunings are used so much that
Right.
so it's, I guess that's all to say that musicians and writers should look at Neil and then look before Neil and look at who Neil was influenced by, and that, because that's how it works, and that's things are borrowed and brought forward, and Neil's used alternate tunings. He's dropped his guitars down completely down to D, not just the low E string,
Right.
and it definitely is a big part of his sound.
Well, and you're the musician and the guitar guy. In my research, so he's basically used the same guitar forever on every record.
That's the thing. So
The
he has
52 Gibson Les Paul that's painted. He calls it Old Black.
Was it a 52?
Yeah, it's a fifth. That's what it said where I was reading. It's a
I'm
52
amazed.
Gibson.
It was a gold top, and he painted it black.
Yeah.
And the first thought I had was, oh my God, if he had never touched the paint on that,
But it's worth a fortune because it's
Neil's guitar.
Because
Yeah.
it's Neil's
And
guitar.
so it doesn't matter. But my reaction was like, oh no, why did he paint it?
Yeah. But he calls it Old Black. It's the guitar he pretty much plays at all times.
Yeah, it's a Les Paul, but he added a whammy bar to it.
Yeah, and the whammy bar is, Neil Young. Part of his identity is the whammy bar.
Yeah.
As you'll hear on his solos. All right, we're going to take a short break, a real quick break here. We're trying to be more of a pro thing here, so we're going to take a quick break. Let everybody pause. Good place to pause this thing and refill your coffee, or it's time to get out of your car. We know you probably consume this thing in bites and not all at once, so we appreciate you guys, and we're going to take a quick break. All right, we're back. Neil Young, 5v5 podcast. Louie and I go way back, and we've been talking about music for a long time, and now we're talking about Neil Young. So now comes the part of the show where we exchange our top fives. As usual, we do not know what each other's top fives are. So there may be some overlap, or there'll be some surprises where I'll tell Lou he's full of it, like I did last week.
No, you just got mad. You got mad at me because I let you go off on Dylan and his Christianity.
Yeah.
Period, and then I dropped in my first song was from Shot of Love.
Yeah. First song, you go first.
So speaking of Buffalo
Springfield. Did you do any kind of order? Did you do?
No. Okay. So this is just every episode. I think this is going to get easier, and it's not. It's just so my top two I had pretty locked in, but the other three were really hard for me to kind of narrow down. But yeah, Buffalo Springfield, Mr. Soul for me, number 5. I'm going to go 5-1. For me, this kind of, it's got that incredible riff, that kind of trippy 1966 kind of vibe. Again,
yeah, it's a psychedelic song.
That L.A. Laurel Canyon,
but it's got a garage rock feel to it.
Yeah, it's a little. It's you got the blend of Neil and Steven, and just Steven brings that kind of bluesy vibe to it as well. And I think that I read somewhere in my travels that this song was at least in part inspired by the death of Lenny Bruce.
Yeah, I didn't. So let's just say now we're matching on this. This is my first song too.
Okay.
And I didn't see that. What I saw was he wrote. So Neil had polio, as we said, but Neil Young was also is epileptic.
Yeah, Caesar.
Which he actually passed on. His daughter is epileptic as well. So he had an epilepsy attack after a Buffalo show in San Francisco that was seen by the audience and everything. And people thought it was part of the show, and they're laughing and pointing and look at Neil, he's going crazy. What's he on?
Mm-hmm.
So I heard, and this could play into the Lenny Bruce thing, that the song's about dealing with fame and infamy,
Yeah.
which that makes sense. That totally makes sense
And
for Lenny
just
Bruce,
the
because Lenny
connection
Bruce.
between artist and fan.
Yeah, and if you're not familiar with Lenny Bruce, which I'd be shocked if any of the looking at the demographics of who listens to our show, I would assume you went to high school with Lenny Bruce. Um, Lenny was a very very popular comedian in the late 50s, early 60s on all the talk shows, and very popular. And then he went subversive, and he became even more popular. And then he went crazy, and he was persecuted basically by the thought police for using words on stage that they didn't like or talking about the Catholic Church. And they would warn him before a show, like famously in Chicago, the Chicago police chief said, "Don't go up there and talk about the Catholic Church or the Pope." He's like, "Sure, no problem, officer." And then he did a whole show about the Pope and got dragged off stage. But a heroin addict, obviously troubled man, and his career and life ended just in court. They bugged him until they killed him, which is a quote I just saw about a new Billie Holiday movie. That they bugged her until they killed her, which is kind of what they did to Lenny Bruce. But his sacrifice opened the world up, opened society up to a big degree, and let people do things that they couldn't do. But then they came around and did it to Jim Morrison a few years later. It's kind of what they did to Jim. They bugged him till they killed him. So that makes sense if that song's about Lenny. I get that. What else you got on the song?
Just like I said, I think that it kind of gets into the power of art to change us, but also connect us. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Like you were saying, he's on stage and he's having a seizure and people are misinterpreting what's really happening. And, I think he also had some interactions with fans that inspired some of the lyrics, probably some female fans. And it's just that line, when we were growing up, we didn't have access to artists like we do now. And it's an interesting, I mean, there's being an artist, but then there's being famous, and those are two different things. And, sometimes the lines get blurred. If you've, especially when I was in LA, working, and, I was out for dinner one night, and a well-known TV actress came in with her family to have dinner. And it was amazing to just watch the energy in the room shift as she's waiting for her table to be ready, or her
like a
private
normal
room.
person.
Yeah, but just the people around her, the people,
Right.
next to me waiting for their name to be called. Now I didn't know her. I hadn't worked with her at all, but you could see the energy in the room shift from all these, fans. Basically, like, they didn't bother her, but they definitely started acting differently and staring at her.
Yeah.
And,
Normal people.
it's bizarre.
Normal people cannot handle having a celebrity nearby.
No.
You would never. These are the same people, as we all do, who get upset when the phone rings during dinner and it's somebody trying to sell you car insurance or whatever, or a spam call. Get angry, yell at the people. My mother used to keep a whistle by the phone, and she would blow a whistle into the phone.
Are you serious?
Yeah. And I would go, "Mom, those are just people with," and this was not like now where it's robocalls and recordings. It was people calling up going, "Do you have good long distance?" These are people with jobs. You're blowing a whistle in there. That's not okay. Just be polite and say no thank you. This is the woman who would speak for an hour to a Jehovah's Witness.
Why didn't she just take the phone off the hook?
Oh, because she was attached to a machine that kept her alive, and it was called the telephone. That's why. So we had in our house, there were no cordless phones. The cord on our telephone,
it was like 100 feet long.
Oh yeah. I could stretch that thing. My mother would walk all over the house. It would be like a family circus cartoon where you're seeing the kid, the trail. It was. Yeah.
My sister used to go out in the hallway and shut the door on the cord so she could have privacy.
She could walk out into the driveway down to the garage and give the phone to my dad. So The same people who get upset at that are the same people when they see a celebrity will just interrupt them in dinner and ask you, can I take a picture?
And they get pissed off if they
And
don't want
then
to
they get
take the
mad when they're
picture.
like, I'm here with my family. I'm trying to eat my shrimp scampi here. Could you leave me alone? They get upset. It's just, it's amazing to me. And don't get me wrong, I'm a celebrity spotter from way back, having, just doing what I do, being on airplanes, going into New York City, going to LA. I always see people nobody notices. There's people who are barely celebrities, but I don't approach them. And if I meet eyes with them, I might give them a nod like, hey, I know who you are. But I've
But
told
I'm
you
not
this
going to
before.
bug you.
Right,
Yeah.
I told you this before when I worked at Putumayo in New York City. Our office was right next to the Public Theater in Astor Place. I walked by Philip Seymour Hoffman so many times. I never talked to him once, but I walked by him so many times that eventually we would just nod to each other like, "Hey, I know you," because he was doing a play there and he was teaching there and he was outside smoking constantly. So my friend Drexel, who is kind of, I should thank him in the credits of this, he he almost got run down by Ben Stiller on a bike outside there. But it's the same thing. You don't get all up in his face or get angry or post on Instagram how Ben Stiller almost drove you over.
Right.
But so we match there. The other thing I'll say about Mr. Soul, and this will be the only thing I'll say about it, we can move to your next song. You can hear now that now that you know about the Rick James thing and the R&B group he was in, you can hear the R&B in this song.
Yeah.
This is an
There's
R&B
definitely some
song,
carryover. Yeah.
which is that's why this song to me stands out compared to everything else on my Neil list.
Yeah.
Not only does it have that Stephen Stills influence for sure and a different type of guitar solo, but still kind of the same type of guitar solo, but it's a very R&B kind of song. It's kind of almost mod. It's like the Who could do Mr. Soul.
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely has like there. And I was going to say there's some little bit of British elements
There is.
that would just come back to here. Right.
Yeah, it
When
has
all
a
the
British
Brits were,
invasion vibe to it,
yeah, when they were all influenced listening to Motown and soul and,
which is what the
and
British
blues.
invasion is. The British
Yeah.
invasion is rhythm and blues,
Yep.
through their ears.
Right.
All right, that's song one. Song one, we're both Mr. Soul.
All
All
right.
right, what's your second
My
song?
next song is Ohio. We touched on this earlier when in the opening. Um, just I mean, look, this is probably one of the best protest songs of all time, and there's a conflict with that, which is you're writing about and putting out something commercially and making money off of, commenting on a tragedy, which is that the National Guard in 1970 were dispatched to Kent State and ended up shooting and killing four students.
Children.
Yeah,
Children the age of
18.
your daughters and
Yeah,
my daughter and
right.
sons. Children.
It still bothers me, yet I still love the song. And I think the song still triggers those feelings in me that I had when I was in college and, make me want to get motivated to get involved.
Well, just the plain poetry of the song. He's not hiding the message, which is
Oh
what
no,
makes it
it's very, yeah,
four dead in Ohio.
right. It's
That is
pretty
the
on the
singable
nose.
chorus. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't take the same angle. To me, Noam Chomsky, Bernie Sanders, whoever you want to hold up, AOC, they get paid for what they do. They get paid to speak. They get paid to do their jobs. There's nothing wrong with that. Why shouldn't? That's what artists are supposed to do. They're supposed to hold a mirror up to
Right.
society. Now, sometimes that's a fun mirror about how great it is to party, but less and less so lately. But it used to be popular music was holding up this type of mirror
Right.
as this is bad. Look at this. Don't look away and do something about it. Interesting connections. We're not going to go into Kent State. Obviously, people should know what the hell it is. But Mark Mothersbaugh from Devo was there. He was a
Really?
student. Yep, he was a student.
I
Joe
think I
Walsh
knew
too.
that, but I
I think
think
Joe Walsh was there too.
oh, you know what? I think I knew that. And I forgot about both of those
Yeah.
guys. That's really fascinating because of obviously Mark's connection to Neil So,
later
we,
on. Right.
yeah.
With Devo.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think I went to college with a guy who was friends with Mark, but that's a
Maybe.
whole other Devo's a whole
I don't know that
other
we could do Devo,
thread.
but
Yeah.
hopefully they get into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. They're on the short list this
Yeah.
time around. What else about Ohio? Anything else you want to put in there?
I mean, just where's the Ohio of today? You know, who's putting out songs like
Well, we
that?
said,
Who's taking a stand?
I'm trying to keep a list here of things we, talk about over and over again. I wrote it down somewhere. I forgot. Oh, repeated themes. One of my repeated themes in my entire life is, yeah, who is doing this? I
Everybody's
appreciate,
playing it safe now.
well, and I appreciate like Lady Gaga is a good example. She or Sia, LGBT rights is a big deal to them, and they speak out on that, and I appreciate that. But that's easy. That's easy. You're not sticking your neck out as an artist, sticking up for, the downtrodden. I get that. Where are these people that we really need to advance culture talking about and challenging leadership? During the Trump presidency, where was that? It shouldn't be Jennifer Aniston. It should be Charlie Puth. It should it should be it should be people like that. I think comedians are doing it, and actors seem to be doing it. Filmmakers are doing it, but musicians now, they don't hold that position in society really anymore. Some do on the fringes, but the mainstream artists aren't speaking out. They play it safe, which is a shame because you got enough money, Justin Bieber. You could take a chance. You got enough money, Lady Gaga, Beyonce. Uh, Other than maybe putting something on her Instagram, what has Beyonce done for Black Lives Matter? I don't know. It's not in an obvious way that has impacted me as a non Beyonce fan. I'd have to seek it out to see, and I shouldn't have to. She should be on every news talk show talking about this, but she deliberately is not, because there's no way they wouldn't have her. The Today Show's not turning down Beyonce because she wants to come on and talk about Black Lives Matter. No way. So it's unfortunate because it won't hurt her career, and if it does hurt her career, who cares?
No, I think she's got enough money.
Right. So I don't get it. But
Yeah.
yeah, you're right on that. You're on the nose on that, and that's like a recurring theme for me, especially in these podcasts. All right, my second song is from Neil's second solo record. Everybody knows this is nowhere. Down by the River. As we talked about last week, I love a story song, and I particularly love a murder ballad. There's nothing better than a good murder ballad. And Neil said about this song everything from, yeah, it's about a guy who kind of loses control and, murders his girlfriend or wife. And he's also said, no, it's just about the end of a relationship, which is probably about both.
Mm.
But the song's, first of all, recorded on the album, and this is a big hit of Neil's. It's 9 minutes long. The song's
Yeah.
9 minutes long, and 6 of those minutes are probably guitar solo. As you said, one note repeated. Just his feel is amazing. But it is, like I said, it's like Long Black Veil or Where Did You Sleep Last Night or the song El Paso. It's this dark, dark song, but at the same time, it's just a joyous song. The way it's presented and the guitar work, and as a non-musician, I think of it as his guitar soloing. It's like in slow motion. It's like he's doing the solo. I don't know. I can't really explain explain it. Trey Anastasio, I wrote this quote down, and I'm not a Fish fan, but Trey Anastasio from Fish has this quote which I thought was brilliant. He says, "If I was ever going to teach a master class to young guitarists, the first thing I would play them is the first minute of Neil Young's original Down by the River." It's one note, but it's so melodic and it just snarls with attitude and anger. It's like he desperately wants to connect.
Yeah. I mean, the ability to play a single note like he can, my favorite guitar player of all time is Carlos Santana.
And
And
Carlos does that too.
one note can just be like the most amazing thing you've ever heard. And
But
Neil,
it's weird how they're so different at the same time though, because you're
yeah,
right. I didn't think about that. They do kind of the same thing, but Carlos does it. I mean, Neil does it. It just it's unexplainable.
I feel like with Neil, like Carlos to me, it's like these beams of light. And with Neil, it's like this just vinegar and just this, you know, there's just a different energy coming through.
Yeah, it is a desperation. It does feel like a desperation. It does feel like a listen to this, listen to this. I mean, he'll take this song. There are multiple live records out, obviously as we discussed. He'll play the song for 30 minutes sometimes, and not in a way other artists will play a song for a long time, like a jam band will, and they'll pepper in other songs and cut little snippets and covers, and then go back to the theme, like the Grateful Dead will do, or like Fish probably does. No, he'll play this song
Kind of
for
like a
30 minutes.
kind of like a jazzer, you know.
It is. It's like
Yeah.
jazz. It's like a trance.
Yeah.
It's
Again with the mantra stuff,
it
like
is.
every episode we kind of touch on that, but there's something to that.
And that's, to me, this song exemplifies what I love about Neil Young. And the fact that this song in its studio version is this. Usually songs become this in their live version, not in the studio version. To have a 9-minute song on an album of that time,
Where did he track that album?
I don't know.
I can't
Probably in
picture
LA.
him at Capitol.
Now the legend says, and I saw a couple interviews of him where he talks about this or asked about it. He wrote "Down by the River," "Cinnamon Girl," and "Cowgirl in the Sand" in the same afternoon. He was laid up in bed with a high fever.
Fever Dream songs.
Right.
Interesting.
Now they're complex songs lyrically and content wise, but very simple songs musically. But simple to the point of genius. Not simple like row, row, row your boat simple. Simple like, how did this happen? And that kind of makes sense that he just channeled these songs from somewhere deep in his psyche. And not that but more, these songs don't come out of nowhere. He probably was thinking of things, for months maybe or years before.
Yeah.
But to be and that album all the way through, those 3 songs to be on one album, to be his second solo record, he's still a very young man.
Not a bad sophomore.
That's not a bad,
Sophomore record is usually the hardest one.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll talk about this later in another song about music again. But all right, so
my third.
What's your third song?
My, Hey, Hey. The acoustic version, most people know. This for me, I mean, this pretty much sums it all up for me with Neil. I mean, it's a song about not selling out, artistic survival.
79, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rust Never Sleeps.
Rust Never Sleeps. Co-written with a guy named Jeff Blackburn, who was an old folkie. Neil had a band with him for a brief period in the late 70s called the Ducks. And excuse me. And again, this kind of came out of his time hanging out with Devo, which I found really bizarre because it's nothing like Devo, but
it's a reaction to punk rock in some ways as well, right?
Yeah. So he got Rust Never Sleeps from Mark. That phrase. And
Mark Mothersbaugh from Devo.
Correct. Right. And what's interesting about this, the one thing that I thought was interesting was, so in the song he talks about, better to burn out than to fade away. And what I thought was really interesting was John Lennon actually commented on that. I think in the last interview John did was for Playboy, right, in 1980.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and Lennon didn't like it at all. You know, he basically was like, I don't appreciate the worship of dead Sid Vicious or dead James Dean or dead John Wayne.
Right.
Jim Morrison. You know, he's like, I worship the people that survive.
Right.
Um, which take that for what I mean. That's John being John, but and the other interesting thing about that is, Neil's getting up there in age now, so Neil's fading away. He's not burning out. He didn't burn out.
No, but
You
in
know.
some ways he burned out several times
Mm-hmm.
and reemerged.
Right.
So Neil comes to, he's not putting on, he's not a poser. He comes to that honestly, and much like Pete Townsend had a reaction to the punk rock movement of the late 70s, I think Neil had the same reaction in that, okay, you want to take this over? Go for it. You want to do this? Because I've been doing it.
Yeah.
Don't think I have it.
But take it
I'm
from
not
me.
ELO. So
Yeah.
take it. Yeah, which is what was Pete's. I mean, Pete literally had a confrontation with Johnny Rotten in a bar in London, and basically said, "You want it? You want to do this? Show me you can do it."
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, those guys didn't do it. They couldn't do it. And Pete kept going, and Neil keeps going.
Right.
They're true punk rockers. And I don't know that song worships people who burn out, but
No,
I
I
think
think
it
it's more of a
appreciates
comment
what the
on it.
sacrifice those people give to culture. And that is better to burn out than fade away, is the quote that Kurt Cobain put in his suicide note.
Right. Yeah.
Which is a cop out. When it comes in somebody's suicide note, it's a cop out. Yeah. But when it's what Lenny Bruce did, which basically was martyr himself, not purposely, but in retrospect, he martyred himself for a cause. Uh, I think that does deserve some kind of praise. You shouldn't try to do that yourself, but but we should appreciate those people that martyr themselves for art.
Yeah. And
I don't know
and
that Sid Vicious did. Sid Vicious didn't. Sid Vicious is just a drug addict
yeah.
and a low life. But Johnny Rotten, if that was Johnny Rotten's story, that he was driving culture.
Yeah. I mean, and then at the end of the day, the song is just epic. It's just, you can just listen to it forever. It never gets old. I never get tired of this song.
Right. And it's probably one of the most covered Neil Young songs, right?
Mm-hmm.
It just covers upon covers that people do it in their live sets, and it's kind of the unofficial motto of rock and roll.
Yeah. And it's just so hooky. Great riff.
Yeah.
So that's my
And on that album, Rust Never Sleeps, is a live album with overdubs. It was from a tour where they would do an acoustic set, and then they'd come out and do an electric set. And that song finishes the acoustic set, and it finishes the electric set, right? So there's two versions of it. I like the electric version.
Yeah, I like the acoustic version.
And you like the acoustic version, which is a very good example of our contrast, I think.
And the one of the things I thought about too, coming off of the Dylan episode, is Neil's harmonica playing. I mean, I always felt like he was more melodic than Dylan.
Well, way more.
But not overdone like John Popper.
Oh no.
Or
Stevie Wonder.
Yeah, just but tonally, and just everything. It just, the emotion comes through with Neil's, and I think that ties back to what you were saying about that Midwestern, prairie Canadian country folk Celtic kind of,
which Bob Dylan comes from as well.
Yeah, I just think Dylan approached it a different way.
Yeah. All right, my third song, 1974 On the Beach album, Revolution Blues. So Neil's coming off Harvest, which was a monster album, just giant, huge hit singles, touring, just a tremendous, tremendous success. And he was upset about it. He did not take it well. As any true rock and roll rebel, he gets angry because he gets popular. So this album, to some degree, and the 3 albums he makes in this time frame, which they call the Ditch Trilogy, is kind of an FU to that success. Like, I could keep doing this. I can make Harvest Part 2, and it will be another giant hit for you jerks. And I'm sure he was getting pressure from the label and management to do such a thing. Instead, he makes these drugged out, psychedelic blues records. Revolution Blues is influenced by Charles Manson,
Who he
met
partied with
everybody did. Listen, everybody in that scene in the late 60s.
The Wilsons.
Because
yeah.
Charles Manson was a scenester. He was there. He was everywhere. And it was a time when that's another, like Dylan going electric, it's a thing people don't really understand. Tarantino addresses to a small degree in Once Upon a Time in Los Angeles.
Hollywood.
Before Charles Manson, you could just walk around Laurel Canyon and go in and out of people's houses, and there were parties going on. Everybody hung out.
That's why they all lived. That's why they all lived off Lookout Mountain, and because
things like that did not happen. Then after Charles Manson, people locked their doors. The world changed, especially Los Angeles. Los Angeles changed completely, and you can hear it in the music for sure. He had also lost 2 of his close friends. A member of Crazy Horse, Danny Whitten, died of a drug overdose right after he'd been kicked out of the group because he just couldn't do it anymore because he was a wreck. And a close friend and roadie, Bruce Berry, same thing, drug overdose, passed away. And Neil even said, "Heart of Gold put me in the middle of the road. Traveling there soon became a bore, so I headed for the ditch. A rougher ride, but I saw more interesting people there." So that's why they call Tonight's the Night, Time Fades Away, and On the Beach the Ditch Trilogy. This song, like I said, is inspired by meeting Charles Manson and the Manson killings. You know, one of the lyrics in the song is, "Well, I heard that Laurel Canyon is full of famous stars, but I hate them worse than lepers, and I'll kill them in their cars." So obviously a direct shout out to Charles Manson and what happened. The record the album was kind of infamous because you couldn't get it. It went out of print for like 20 years. It was not reissued, and obviously pre-internet, there was no way. If somebody had it, then you could hear it. Kind of like Buckingham Nicks. If somebody had it, then you could hear it. But other than that, people didn't hear this record. It finally comes out on CD in 2003 after fans bombard the Neil and the label asking them to do it. And now it's been reissued on vinyl and it's appreciated. But this song, it's Neil doing his psychedelic country thing that he does. And it's a perfect example of that. But it was a miserable time, and he was trying to get out of a hole by digging deeper, for sure. I saw a quote, Glenn Frey said to him, "Why are you doing this to yourself?" And Glenn, being in the Eagles, was probably like, "Dude, you just made Harvest. Why are you doing this? Why are you making these weird records? Why are you torturing yourself?" But that's Neil. He had to torture himself. He had to. And those 3 albums, the casual fan probably are not that familiar with them, but I would just go back. It'll be, obviously, there'll be a couple playlists from these albums.
Yeah,
check out.
There's on Tonight's the Night, there's a song called Mellow My Mind that is just awful. And I think, some people say that's Neil's doing that on purpose.
He may be.
Right. But so there's actually a cover of that Simply Red did that I absolutely love. And some people don't like it because it's too well done.
It works in a different context.
Yeah. But it's amazing. And it kind of makes me realize like how great the song is apart from the recording. So like when you hear Simply Red's version, we'll have to throw that on our playlist so people can check it out. But it's just a really great kind of, and again, it goes back to Neil's R&B.
Well, Tonight's the Night,
Days.
that album is mostly a live album. It's a tribute to Bruce Berry, and it apparently is the songs that Bruce loved most in that time. So that's what that set list was about. So that's how that song probably got on there.
Yeah.
This guy Bruce loved it, so he put it on. But this album, these three albums really reflect what our pop culture was going through after 60s idealism of, hey, we're going to change the world, and now you're still mired in and you didn't change the world. Manson destroys Southern California's hippie vibe. Nixon's in the White House. The Vietnam War's still going. This is depressing time.
Mm-hmm.
So these albums kind of reflect that, which appeals to me very much so. So that is my third song, Revolution Blues from On the Beach, coming out in July 1974.
All right, so we're down to our last two here.
That's two. What's your number four?
So my number four, or my number two, because it's my top two.
Oh, right, you're going backwards.
Is Little Wing off 1980's Hawks and Doves. To me, this song is so beautiful. It's way too short on the album. I wish it were longer. It clocks in at like 2 minutes and change, something like that. It's but there's funny enough, thankfully, just everything's on YouTube. There's actually a cover version that was recorded sometime in the 70s, I'm guessing, on really bad video of Michael Hedges doing a cover of this on the Berkeley, California campus.
Uh-huh.
And it's amazing, and it's a lot longer. So we'll have to put that out too. But this is a song, Neil was fascinated with birds, and again, we touched on this earlier, like Native American culture, and just to me, this song has this kind of lightness and it's almost like a children's story in a way. Birds being often, representative of departed souls or people coming back to visit us after they've passed. In Celtic lore, birds were considered reincarnated people. And really, this is really bizarre. So this morning I'm sitting in my chair, sipping my tea, and it's snowing out, and I look out the window, and a bird kind of hits the window and is like hanging onto the screen. And I just thought that was really kind of bizarre coming into this podcast, knowing that this song is on this list. But this is one of the most beautiful, light, delicate songs, and thematically to me, it's kind of speaks to, hope and, just this fear of someone leaving you, which
Right.
is a nice side to Neil that, you don't often talk about or see, and my last two songs here kind of touch on that side of him.
Well, we mentioned that Homegrown album, which is about the breakup of his first marriage. And it was so painful he never put the record out, and just came out a couple years ago.
Yeah.
So he does have that side to him for sure.
And again, I do want to say, we talk a lot about Neil being, having this anger and that side to him, but he also has this, he and his wife Peggy, who sadly passed away not too long ago. They had a son with cerebral palsy. And they've started a foundation.
Right.
Zeke,
so his son Zeke has.
Yeah, he has mild, two sons.
Is a very mild version of CP.
Yeah.
But Ben, the younger son, is severely handicapped.
Yeah.
But Neil takes him everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
He is at the side of the stage at every show. He's out at every tour. He and Neil are very, very close. They share that love of trains. Neil was famously a part owner of the Lionel Train Company for a while,
You
till
know,
they.
that's funny you mentioned that because I learned, and I didn't. This is another thing about Neil I didn't know until recently, researching for this podcast. Neil's kind of a self-taught engineer and
Yeah,
kind of created
he
his own
invented
train
some stuff.
swishing
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
He's got like 3,000 square feet of track or some crazy thing in this barn on his property.
And doesn't
Uh,
he? I mean, he's got all these classic retro cars, but they're all kind of biofueled. I
yeah,
mean,
he's a
he's
he's an
really a
intense collector. Yeah,
fascinating guy. I
yeah.
mean,
So my next song is kind of similar to your theme here. I I had to pick something from Zuma as somebody who, like yourself, came of age in college and came into the business under the umbrella of grunge, whatever that is. Zuma is, as we mentioned before, is kind of the blueprint for what grunge became, or it was. I would have picked Cortez the Killer, but I felt like I needed a palate cleanser, so I picked Don't Cry No Tears, which is a great song and very much like Little Wing in that it's a sweet song, but it's very Neil. But it's a good example, as you just said with Little Wing with Michael Hedges. If Linda Ronstadt or Glenn Frey did this song, it would be corny. It would be sappy. It would probably still be great, but it would be corny. With Neil, it's not. It's just a straight on rock and country ballad, and it's just a great, it's just a wonderful song. Uh, Also on that record is Danger Bird, which is just classic Neil guitar song. And it's an album of darks and lights, and it's just super interesting. It's fairly well known record because of Cortez the Killer, which is one of Neil's most popular songs. Um, and it's referenced by a lot of grunge people and people that come from that wave of alternative music like Radiohead. Uh, Tom York has talked about this record. So Don't Cry No Tears, Zuma, 1975. That's my fourth song. All
so
right,
down to the last one.
last song.
My number one is off of Harvest, but it's not what
Hmm.
you think. A Man Needs a Maid. This song,
That's to his first wife.
yeah,
That's
and and this is a great example of what he wrote. With all due respect, I don't care what he wrote it about. I know what people have said about it. I know it's had some controversy because it's considered chauvinistic on the
it's
surface.
not what it's.
People just, and again, people don't really pay
People
attention.
see the title and they're like,
Yeah.
a maid. He needs somebody to clean up after him. That's not what he's. That's not the
Right,
form of
right,
the word
right.
he's using.
And
Yeah,
even if Neil's
he's
writing
using a
about
word.
his
It's made in. He's not
right,
use. He's not
right,
meaning need somebody to do his laundry. Right.
exactly. To me, really, what this comes down to is insecurity. There's a guy who's singing about uh, ultimately this fear of being hurt by somebody else by putting yourself out there and desperately needing and wanting to be loved, but being afraid of that being that vulnerable. And
Right.
that's that to me is what this song is about. And there's something just again with Neil, it's you're kind of peeling back all these layers and all the gruff exterior and all of that and getting to the core of what's really in there. And it just hits me so hard every time. I think it's one of his best songs he's ever written.
Yeah.
Production wise, I may have mixed it slightly differently. I think the strings are a bit heavy on it.
It's a
Um,
commercial album. I mean, there's a
yeah,
reason why it was a huge hit. It
yeah,
was it was made very commercially. Whether
yeah.
that's a mistake or not, I don't know. But Neil obviously felt like it was a mistake later. As
I just think the strings, it's kind of like the Beatles when they incorporated strings. They're just a little bit too heavy. Could have been dialed back a few dB maybe,
right,
but
right.
from a songwriting standpoint, I mean, it's incredible. Um,
Well, and he
actually,
does go back to that vibe some 20 plus years later with Harvest Moon, right?
yeah, yeah,
Which is very, a well produced folk rock album,
yeah.
which was a huge hit. You know, it was a
Hmm.
huge hit for him, that record, which is odd at a time when MTV was dominating, but he had an unplugged concert, and that Harvest Moon was a giant record and is obviously directly related to Harvest. All right, my last song. And I do, one thing I want to say is, so both of us don't really go past 1980, right? When's Hawks
Uh,
and Doves?
well, on my list, no, but I have tons of honorable mentions that go up into the early '90s, but nothing past that.
No, I don't really, I haven't really interacted with much Neil Young other than reissue stuff after Harvest Moon, really. I mean, I've listened to all the other albums. I own probably most of them on CD, but I haven't really listened to them. There's good points. I don't know why. I just think it's because of the volume of it.
Actually, I have to correct myself. I think Razor Love was an honorable mention for me.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, so that's about as far as I went.
Well, and you can't get any better Neil Young being Neil Young than Ragged Glory, which was his. I'm the godfather of grunge, so I'm going to make a grunge record in the middle of the grunge movement, and he did, and it's brilliant, and it's better almost than anything else people 20 plus years younger were doing at the time. All right, so my last song, 1979, Rust Never Sleeps. Going back to Rust Never Sleeps, Powderfinger, which on that two-sided record of acoustic and electric is the first song on the electric side of the record. It another murder ballad, another story song. To me, this song in and of itself is a western.
Mm.
Tarantino should make a movie out of this. He should make a movie of this song. It's like reading a Larry McMurtry novel. This is it's I won't go into what it's about, but it's a great song. It's very Neil being country. It's very Neil playing the type of guitar he plays, and actually I didn't say this when we were talking about his guitar playing, but as a non-musician, one of the things that appeals to me about Neil Young, and especially when he plays with Crazy Horse or with another themed band, um, is the songs always seem like they're a beat behind, that he's pulling you along, and you're a little bit ahead. You're like waiting. You're already waiting for the thing to happen, and it hasn't
Yeah,
happened yet. Which is kind
yeah,
of how his solos are, which is engaging. I can see it could be frustrating to people who are used to more contemporary, on the nose music,
right,
like
yeah,
what the Eagles did. Basically, their version of Neil Young. Eagles are just, an upgraded version of that. What CSN does for the most part.
hmm,
But Neil's stepping back from that,
right.
and almost literally. And this song does the same thing. The funny thing about this song,
Probably comes from Neil's R&B
right?
days. Creating that
Probably.
movement and that tension with the bass and the drums being, the beat is like a circle, right? But
Hmm.
you can be at different spots on that circle.
Right. Yeah, I find as a non-musician, I find that stuff fascinating, and that's to me that's the magic. To a non-musician, that's less math, whereas you think of it in kind of a logical math way because you're a
Hmm.
musician, you can see it. To people like me, that's where when people talk about music is magical, that's what they're talking about.
Yeah, you feel it.
It's not literally magic. It's just this thing that it's like another language. It's like when you hear somebody speaking fluent English and then they start speaking Farsi. You're like, how do you
Right.
do that?
Yeah,
How's your brain work that way?
and when you can play, you listen to music differently, and
Right.
you just kind of, it's like when you hear someone say, "Oh, I dreamt in another language because I know the language." It's like,
Right.
well, how do you do that? You
How do you
just
do
do.
that? Right.
You just know it.
He wrote this song and demoed it and gave it to Ronnie Van Zant for Leonard Skinner.
Well,
And
that's
Ronnie
interesting
died.
because that
Ronnie
kind
died
of
before Leonard Skinner ever recorded it because Ronnie died in the plane crash. Uh, but
that's
yeah,
really interesting because that kind of ties into the Al Cooper connection, doesn't it? with Al
I don't know.
Cooper's involvement with Leonard Skinner
Oh,
and Sweet
maybe.
Home Alabama, and
Oh, right.
right,
Well, in Southern Man, the whole thing, people thought there was a controversy, that
yeah,
Neil hated Leonard Skinner and Leonard hated Neil, whereas they were very close and fans of each other.
yeah.
I believe Neil was a pallbearer at Ronnie Van Zant's funeral, but he gave this song to Ronnie. And there's an acoustic version of it, which I don't think is the demo, but is an early recording of it from 1976 that's on one of these archives reissued called The Hitchhiker. And it's
Hmm.
amazing, but it's different at the same time. It's once again one of those songs that can have different lives in different ways, and if they're covered by people, they become a whole nother thing as well. So that is my last song, Powderfinger, Rust Never Sleeps, June 1979.
So, what's his best album,
I got this
or what's
broken
your
down.
favorite?
I got this broken down, best and favorite. My favorite Neil Young album is On the Beach. I love that record for lots of reasons. I just flat out love it, but I just love the mythology of it as well
Mm.
because it kind of disappeared and it was hard to get your hands on. Uh, and I have two versions of it. I have a reissue version, and I have a version of from Reprise. That was one of the original pressings of it. That is beat to hell, but it's great. Um, but I think his best album is Rust Never Sleeps. I
I
think
would
from
just, for me, it's just I have a favorite, which for me is Harvest Moon. Um, I think Harvest Moon would have been a perfect album if Old King hadn't been on there.
mhm. I've listened to
Um,
that album so
I
I
know.
was working
Yeah,
in what year is that album? Like
92.
92.
Yeah.
So I was working in a record town in the Danbury Fair Mall, managing a record town. And I heard that album so many times because it was one of the five records we were allowed to play.
That's got to be your version of Yamo Be There
Yeah,
from
I'm gonna
40-year
Yamo
old.
kill myself
Yeah,
if I have to. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
40-year-old virgin.
That Katie Lang's Ingenue.
Yes.
Um, what's her name from the Eurythmics? Annie
Annie
Lennox.
Lennox.
That
Why?
solo album of hers. That for oh yeah, I've heard those albums so many times. Chris
Yeah.
Isaac.
Yeah, Wicked Game.
Wicked Game. Yeah, there were only like a handful of records we were allowed. You couldn't. They wouldn't let us play like Sergeant Pepper.
Right.
you know, and probably, well, not probably. I know why. It's because the record labels were paying Transworld, the owner of Record Town. They were paying them to put these albums on the playlist to play. But it would get brutal.
Yeah.
And
Well,
speaking of that, I say this a lot, and nobody believes me to this day because they don't. People our age believe it. Danbury Fair Mall, there was a Record Town, there was a Tape World, which became a Music World. There was another store which was Music something, Record World, Record World. There were three record stores in this mall. Three.
yeah.
My Record Town was doing over $1 million a year in sales.
That's unbelievable.
And the other two stores were approaching that. There was like CDs, cassettes, and and related merchandise.
No
But
vinyl, probably.
no vinyl, and not like today where there's toys and all this other garbage in the stores.
Yeah.
Just mostly 90% you're selling recorded music. Out of that building in Danbury, Connecticut, $2+ million a year in sales of music. That mall's still there. There's certainly not a record store in it now. There's not a record store in it, which makes sense. Why would there be? But it's shocking how, and the business, an article came out yesterday in the United States, the music business was over $12 billion in income last year. $12 billion. And you could almost name all the record stores that exist.
Hmm.
I could pretty close name all of them.
Didn't they say somewhere that Tower's coming back?
Tower exists. Tower.com is coming back.
Okay. All right.
Which I have artists reaching out to me going, how come my record's not on Tower.com? It's because none of the majors have opened Tower.com yet. So I don't know why they would launch Tower.com and not have deals with the majors and only have deals to get music from warehousing. But yes, Tower.com is a thing. Tower in Japan is still a thing. But they're not coming back in bricks and mortar.
That was a good documentary.
Colin Hanks made a really good documentary about Tower. And Russ Solomon, who founded Tower, I was privileged enough I wouldn't say I knew the man, but I did talked with him many times, and I had dinner with him a couple times, and he was the kindest, most wonderful mentor the music business has ever seen. A true weirdo, but in a good way.
Yeah. I think, you know,
Not sure how we started on talking about this,
well,
but
we were talking about Harvest Moon in 92.
Harvest Moon, yes,
You know,
the album that haunts me to this day.
but you know so what was Neil's pinnacle? I mean, was it that early 90s
Yeah,
Harvest Moon,
he's in the
MTV
Rock and Roll
Unplugged?
Hall of Fame twice. He's one of the few people in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice.
Yeah.
As a member of Buffalo Springfield, which is kind of strange, frankly, that Buffalo Springfield in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but fine. And as a solo artist, he's not in as a member of CSN&Y, which you can argue he should be in 3 times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which I don't know if anybody's in 3 times. I think personally, his relationship with his son and the fact that they could own part of Lionel Train Company together for that time, I think that probably would be a personal pinnacle of his.
Yeah.
You know, the way.
That fascinates me. I want to dig into that more.
Well, apparently he had an ownership, and he lost when Lionel finally went belly up. Everything got washed away. He lost everything, but he's happy about it because he ended up with. There's a New York Times article that I read that talks a lot about it. Doesn't bother him because he ended up with a lot of cool stuff that he wouldn't have got otherwise. Trains and switching things that he helped invent and all this stuff. He kind of just saw it as his hobby, and it parlayed into a business.
I love the romance of trains, and you know, funny enough, without even thinking, I was on YouTube the other day watching something about a sleeper car trip in the Highlands of Scotland. You know, some guy taking the train from London to Scotland. And it's just, you know, it's a cool thing that we don't really have as much. Maybe that comes again from Neil's growing up on the plains.
It's the romance of it, yeah, for sure. And, you know, living where I live.
He likes vintage stuff. I mean, he likes vintage cars. He likes trains. You know,
he does. And that New York Times article, actually, I would recommend. I'll put it in in the blog post about this because he talks a lot about that. All right, so
I would say musically for me, that whole Harvest Moon, you know, playing with Pearl Jam, rocking in the free world,
right, Ragged Glory,
MTV Unplugged. Although my pet peeve with the MTV Unplugged, Neil, and I think this kind of held true for a lot of those MTV Unplugs, is what was it with white audiences at those MTV Unplugs just wooing at the most odd time of us? Like, people are cheering and wooing when he's playing the needle in The Damage Done.
I know, people are idiots. Apparently his Unplugged, he recorded a whole one and threw it away and made them come back and do it again. So I don't know. I would love to hear that first one.
I think Nils Lofgren from Springsteen's band was in that band.
Well, Nils is in the band, in and out of Neil's bands all through the late 70s into the 80s. So he and Nils have a very close connection.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're killing. Our producer Billy's been on this the whole time. As always, we tried to go short. We go long, but I don't care. You know, listen to it, please. So thanks for being with us today. Don't forget we're on social media, mostly on Instagram, and you could listen to this episode's companion playlist on Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube. You can get to all these things from our the5v5podcast.com. And don't forget to rate and review us where you can. If you listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please rate and review the show. Tell your friends about it. We want to thank Billy, our producer and editor. We want to thank Larry Gendron for our logo, Jay Reason for graphics and tech support, and our executive producer, Ethan Isaac, and everyone at the Factory Underground. And I personally want to thank Kwaku Anning, which Lou wants to thank as well, for inspiration in podcasting, and also my close friend Drexel Baker, who has been a huge supporter and kind of helps me with some of my research. That's it, Lou. We're done.
Thanks, buddy.
Talk to you soon.
It was a good one.
Bye.
Bye.